I never thought I'd be sitting here, trying to untangle the mess of my own family like it's a riddle wrapped in tinfoil. If you told me 10 years ago that my own son would end up playing me like a fiddle, I'd have laughed and offered you a piece of banana bread and a reality check. But here I am, mid-60s, a retired climbing instructor with a rebuilt hip, living in a loft I designed myself, and realizing that sometimes the people you love most are the ones who quietly sharpen the knife. I live alone in a cozy space right off the Arts District. It's not flashy, but it's mine. Sunlight all morning, creaky floorboards that I've grown fond of, and walls lined with old gear and the kinds of books no one borrows anymore. I've got a little herb garden on the balcony, and a shelf full of postcards from hikes I used to take before my knees joined the rebellion. My days are quiet, my tea is strong, and up until recently, I thought my heart was well guarded. Then comes Marcus, my son 35, with a smile that used to melt my heart and now just melts my patience. He's always been creative, a sculptor these days with a boutique art business he runs with his wife Lila, who's 32 and has the energy of a hummingbird dipped in glitter. They rent studio space in a trendy part of town, sell wire sculptures for outrageous prices, and host events where everyone drinks cucumber water and talks about form and energy. I try to stay supportive, even when I have no idea what on earth they're talking about. Over the years, Marcus has leaned on me more times than a loose tent pole. I helped pay off his college loans when his art history meets experimental metalwork major didn't quite lead to job offers. I bailed him out of a few sticky money situations, some involving poor budgeting, others involving poor judgment, and one involving an investment opportunity that turned out to be a literal pyramid scheme. And yes, there was a gambling phase too. Poker. I still twitch when I hear someone shuffle a deck of cards. But through it all, I held on to the belief that he'd come around. That one day, I'd see a glimmer of maturity behind those charming eyes, and he'd finally understand what I gave up to keep him afloat. I told myself that was what mothers did, sacrificed, forgave, hoped. Well, hope's a funny thing. Sometimes it floats, sometimes it sinks like a stone. A few weeks ago, Marcus called me with what he described as big news. He sounded breathless and giddy like a boy who just got picked first for dodgeball. "Mom," he said, "Lila's pregnant. We need to expand the studio, maybe even move into something bigger so we can make room for the baby. You know. Fresh start, family, all that. Now let me tell you something about me. I've got a soft spot the size of Texas when it comes to babies. You tell me there's a grandbaby on the way, and I'm already knitting booties before you've finished your sentence." I didn't even hesitate. I wired them $300,000 from a savings account I'd been sitting on for years. That money was supposed to be for travel, but none of that mattered in the moment. I was going to be a grandmother, or so I thought. The call ended quickly. "Thanks, Mom," Marcus said, breezy as ever. "You'll see. Everything's going to be perfect." I was about to tell him how proud I was of him, how excited I was, how I'd already started flipping through baby name books. But before I could say another word, I heard muffled laughter on the other end, Lila's voice, clear as a bell. Finally, the old woman sent the money. I froze. Marcus's voice followed, low and amused. Took faking a damn award, but it worked. It felt like someone had flipped my world upside down and shook it just to hear the pieces rattle. I stood there with the phone still in my hand, staring at the window like it could explain what I just heard. Not angry. Not yet. Just hollow. Like someone had reached into my chest and gently scooped everything out. No yelling. No tears. Just the realization that my own son had played me like a fiddle, and I'd given him the bow. After I hung up the phone, I stood in the kitchen for what felt like hours, just staring at the kettle as it cooled. The tea bag had steeped far too long by then, turning bitter. Funny how even the tea knew how I felt. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. They weren't even subtle, not really. There were all those missed holidays, Thanksgiving with too much going on at the studio, Christmas where flights were just too expensive, even my birthday, which somehow slipped their minds 2 years in a row. Text messages? Only when bills were due. Calls? Only when they wanted something. And yet I made excuses. Every time. They're busy. They're building a life. They'll come around. I think I told myself that more than I told them I loved them. Marcus wasn't always like this. He was bright-eyed, curious, endlessly creative. As a little boy, he'd collect broken things, lamps, bike chains, wind-up toys, and turn them into strange, beautiful sculptures. I used to joke he could turn garbage into gold. What I didn't realize is that as he got older, he started seeing people the same way, just parts to be used and repurposed. Before Lila came along, Marcus had already made money feel like a revolving door. First it was small things, a couple hundred for a workshop, a bit extra for a new tool set. Then came the larger requests, rent, medical bills for a bad back. I never once saw him treat. And of course the gambling. That chapter still makes my eye twitch. There was a stretch, maybe 10-12 years ago, where I got a knock at the door from a man I didn't recognize. Real polite in a crisp shirt. Said he was just here to collect what Marcus owed. I remember my knees going a little wobbly as I asked him to come in and offered him lemonade. I emptied my account the next day. Marcus promised me it was a one-time thing. I think that was the third time I heard that. Maybe the fourth. Still I helped. I always helped. Because that's what I thought a good mother did. I skipped new hiking boots I desperately needed, canceled my pottery class, just to keep his name out of collections. I wanted him to feel supported. I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted to believe I could love him enough to make him whole. When he told me Lila was expecting, something inside me lit up. I thought, this is it. This is the moment he turns the corner. I imagined a baby would give him that grounding, that sense of responsibility. Maybe even a sense of legacy. I pulled out the dusty baby quilt my grandmother made me. I even started planning a corner of my loft for a playpen, just in case they needed a sitter. But the truth crashed down hard. There was no baby. There was no award. There was no need for a bigger studio. They'd lied to me, hand in hand, smiling sweetly all the while. They weren't planning a nursery. They were planning how to spend my money, and what to do with me when I ran out of use. I wasn't a mother to them anymore. I was an ATM with a pantry and a pension. And once the funds dried up, I had a sneaking suspicion they planned to disappear me along with the leftovers in the fridge. It was the first time I truly understood. Marcus didn't see me as a person anymore. He saw me as property, something to manage, something to extract value from. And that realization stung more than anything. 2 days after that gut punch of a phone call, Marcus and Lila showed up at my door. No warning, no "Hey mom, are you free?" Just a knock, and there they were, smiling like a pair of game show hosts. Marcus had one of those reusable tote bags slung over his shoulder. Inside were herbal supplements, a climbing chalk bag, and a big jar of something green that looked like it had been blended with swamp water. I couldn't even tell if it was food or face cream. "Thought we'd drop by and check on you," Marcus said, pulling me into one of those hugs that last just long enough to feel staged. "You know, surprise you." I'll admit it was a surprise, just not the kind that makes you cry happy tears. More like the kind that makes you check to make sure your valuables are still where you left them. Lila stepped in behind him, beaming like she was filming a commercial for organic toothpaste. "Marcus talks about you all the time," she said, setting a box of loose-leaf tea on my counter. "You're all he ever talks about." I nearly laughed right there in the entryway. If I hadn't overheard that phone call myself, I might have believed it. Instead, I smiled sweetly, thanked them. They made themselves comfortable in record time. Lila took over my little tea nook like she designed it herself, rearranging my mugs into color order. Marcus dropped his bag by the stairs and flopped onto the couch with all the grace of a teenager home from college. We sat down for tea, mine, not hers, thank you very much, and chatted about nothing in particular. They asked about my climbing friends, the community garden, the soup kitchen I volunteer at once a week. I gave short answers, careful not to say too much. I was studying them, watching their eyes, listening to the cadence of their words. A few sips in, Marcus leaned back and said, "So we were thinking, our apartment's getting tight with all the sculpture stuff. Equipment everywhere, you know. Maybe we could stay here for a bit?" I tilted my head, as if I hadn't already predicted that ask before they even stepped through the door. "Of course," I said, smiling like a grandmother on a sitcom. "There's plenty of space." He grinned like a child who'd been given candy. "That's what I thought. It's just temporary, you know, while we figure things out." "Of course," I repeated. Lila set her mug down gently, her manicured fingers tapping the porcelain rim like she was about to deliver a line from a well-rehearsed monologue. "And while we're staying here," she said, "wouldn't it make sense to transfer the loft into Marcus's name? just to make it easier to manage permits, taxes, repairs. All the maintenance stuff. I nodded slowly. That's very thoughtful. I even reached out and patted Marcus's hand like I was proud of him for coming up with such a responsible suggestion. He smiled, but there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, like he'd expected me to put up more of a fight. Truth was, I'd already made my decision. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to listen. Watch. Let them feel like they were winning. Because I knew how this was going to end, and it wasn't going to be how they imagined. Once Marcus and Lila settled into my loft, you'd have thought we were filming a commercial for perfect family living. Every morning, Lila floated into the kitchen humming some show tune, apron tied around her waist like she was auditioning for a musical. She made scrambled eggs with fresh herbs from my own garden, mind you, set the table with linen napkins, and called it brunch even when it was just toast and jam. Marcus, who had never met a sponge he liked, suddenly discovered the thrill of cleaning. I caught him one afternoon polishing the stovetop, humming along to a playlist called Productive Mornings. He even wiped the corners behind the kettle, corners I didn't know existed. If I hadn't known better, I might have cried from joy. But I did know better. I knew a performance when I saw one. And honey, this was a full Broadway production. Every compliment, every kind gesture, they were all part of the script. They were waiting for something. Not love, not forgiveness, just paperwork. They tiptoed around it at first, but I could feel the tension. Lila started asking if I'd heard from the notary. Marcus began leaving stacks of junk mail on my kitchen counter, casually sorted into important and less important piles. And right on top of the important stack, a deed transfer template I hadn't asked for. I played along, smiled, nodded, let them think I was slow-rolling the process because of age or confusion. Little did they know, I'd been filing things in my head since day one. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was late. I just finished my evening chamomile and was about to curl up with a knitting project when I heard whispers from the living room. I didn't mean to listen, but the walls in my place are older than I am and twice as thin. I crept up to the hallway and pressed my ear gently against the wall. As soon as she signs it, we kick her out, Marcus said, his voice low and firm. Not angry, not guilty, just matter of fact. Lila's voice followed, a giggle tucked behind her words. And with any luck, we'll get that inheritance too. Then Marcus again. She's just dead weight now. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for their voices to fade. Long enough for my fingers to go cold. Dead weight. That's what he called me. The same boy I once carried down a mountain trail when he twisted his ankle during a summer hike. The same child I stayed up with during chickenpox and heartbreak. Dead weight. I didn't cry. I didn't march into the living room or make a scene. That's not my way. I went into the kitchen, turned the kettle back on, and made another cup of tea. I sat in my favorite chair, crocheted cushion, view of the night sky through the big window, and I thought. I thought about every dish I'd washed for them. Every time I'd said, take your time, when they were late with rent. Every apology I'd whispered to myself when they didn't call, because I didn't want to admit the truth. That night, I didn't reach for tissues or anger. I reached for something else entirely. A quiet little voice inside me, one I hadn't heard in years, sat up and said, enough. And just like that, a plan began to take shape. The next morning started like most others. The sun was barely peeking through the curtains, casting a golden wash across the hardwood floor. I stretched, reached down to pat the side of the bed where my morning usually began, with Splint. My old spaniel had been with me for 12 years. Ever since he wandered up to my back porch with a limp and a tail wag that could have knocked over a lamp. He was more than a pet. He was my companion, my reminder that loyalty could still exist in this world. But that morning, the spot beside my bed was empty. First, I didn't panic. I assumed he was in the kitchen, sniffing around his food bowl or parked in his favorite sunbeam near the fridge. But when I walked through the hallway, calling his name, something didn't feel right. The food dish was full. His water bowl untouched. His favorite blanket still bunched up in the corner, untouched. I called louder. I checked behind the couch, under the table, in the laundry nook. Nothing. By the time I got outside, barefoot and still in my robe, my voice was hoarse from calling his name. I walked the whole yard twice. Looked behind the shed, in the garden beds, even inside the compost bin because frankly Splint didn't always have great judgment. But the yard was quiet. Too quiet. I came back inside, heart pounding in that awful way where it feels like it's trying to warn you of something before your brain catches up. Marcus and Lila were at the table, eating waffles and acting like it was just another Tuesday. I swallowed hard. Have either of you seen Splint? Marcus didn't even pause his chewing. He waved his fork in the air like he was giving a lazy traffic signal. Oh, the dog? Yeah, I took him out this morning. Left him somewhere. My body went still. What do you mean left him somewhere? He shrugged like he was commenting on the weather. I don't know. He kept getting underfoot. Figured he'd be happier out roaming. I felt my knees lock up, like my body was trying to keep me upright while my soul crumbled. He was my dog, I said, barely a whisper. Marcus scooped another bite of waffle, unfazed. He was a mutt, Mom. He was old. Always in the way. Then came Lila, sipping from one of my favorite mugs like it belonged to her. She looked up, her voice as sweet as ever. Honestly, Helen, you should be grateful. Less to worry about, right? No more dog hair on the furniture. And just like that, something inside me snapped. Not loudly. Not like a plate crashing to the floor. More like the quiet snap of a thread that's been pulled too tight for too long. That dog had been there through everything. Every holiday Marcus skipped. Every hard night I spent convincing myself I hadn't failed as a mother. Splint listened when no one else did. He wagged his tail when my hands were too tired to crochet, curled up at my feet when my knees ached from the cold. He was there when no one else bothered to be. And they just discarded him. They took the only living creature in this house who actually loved me without condition. And they didn't even blink. I didn't cry, not then. I just stood there while my mind rewrote everything I thought I understood about my son. And in that silence I stopped being unsure. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't going to be used and tossed aside like yesterday's newspaper. No, they'd made a mistake. A big one. I didn't say much after Splint disappeared. Not a word. Not even when Marcus made some offhand remark about how peaceful the loft was now. Instead, I went to the kitchen and started doing what I've always done when the world felt too heavy. I cooked. And I didn't just cook, I cooked. I brought out every hearty, high-calorie, soul-smothering recipe I knew. Creamy stews that clung to your ribs like a needy toddler. Macaroni and cheese made with 4 kinds of cheese and more butter than a holiday potluck. Rich chicken pot pies with extra pastry crust. I even dusted off my slow cooker for beef stroganoff so tender you could cut it with a spoon. All under the guise of kindness. You two look so thin, I told them with a soft smile. Let me take care of you. Oh, and they ate it up. Literally. Marcus went back for thirds. Lila started requesting favorite dishes, lasagna, creamy pumpkin soup, chicken dumplings, risotto with sausage and mushrooms. Every bite they took felt like another stitch in the tapestry I was weaving. They thought it was motherly affection. What they didn't realize was I was feeding more than their stomachs. I was feeding their comfort, their trust, their complacency. Lila began wearing looser clothing around the house. Marcus started unbuttoning the top of his pants after meals and sitting back with a satisfied sigh like he'd conquered a mountain. They both got slower, heavier, more sluggish. But still they asked for more. And I gave it to them. One evening, while cleaning up from dinner, an extra cheesy scalloped potato bake, I noticed Marcus had left his laptop open on the couch. Not password protected because let's face it, Marcus has never been one for foresight. I don't usually snoop. But something pulled me toward that glowing screen like a lighthouse in a storm. Right there in the browser, clear as daylight. Best ways to stage a disappearance. How to cash in on investment policies after death. Remote trails with low foot traffic near mountainous regions. My stomach dropped. Not in a dramatic movie kind of way. Just slowly, quietly, like a final puzzle piece slipping into place. It wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't just about the loft or my savings. They were planning something far worse. And I'd almost let them. That night, over warm cornbread and slow-cooked chili, Marcus leaned over and said, "You know, Mom, we were thinking it might be nice to go out to the mountains this weekend. Just a little nature getaway. Get some air, clear our heads." I glanced up, spoon paused halfway to my mouth. Lila chimed in with a gentle hand on my wrist. "We've all been a bit tense lately. It'd be nice to reconnect. Just us." I smiled warmly and wiped the corner of my mouth with a napkin. That sounds lovely. They smiled back, thinking I was the fool. But they didn't know that behind every recipe I'd served, every napkin I'd folded, every sweet of course, dear, I'd already started setting my table for something they wouldn't see coming. We went out on a fresh Saturday morning, with the sky clear and the air holding that quiet kind of stillness that always comes before something interesting happens. I packed snacks, homemade granola bars, trail mix, and a few chocolate-dipped apricots, because I never did believe in hiking without dessert. Marcus and Lila brought the drinks as expected. They picked the trail, said it was quiet, peaceful, tucked into a state park off the beaten path. I knew the place well. I used to hike there when my knees still behaved like they had purpose. It was the kind of trail where cell service was more of a rumor than a feature. Picturesque and just remote enough to hide things. Like intentions. On the way there, Marcus was oddly chipper, humming to himself, drumming the steering wheel. Lila was dressed in full athleisure like she was headed for a fitness commercial instead of a shady plot. I sat in the back, nodding along, holding my snack bag like it was just another nice day. When we reached the trailhead, they got a little too helpful. Marcus offered to carry my water. Lila looped her arm through mine like she was escorting me to a ballroom instead of a hiking path. I played along, of course. Why ruin their fun? A mile in, we stopped near a scenic overlook. The trees were thick and lovely, the ground soft with pine needles. Marcus pulled out a bottle. "Electrolytes," he said, handing it to me. "You'll need it for the climb." I took it, nodded like a grateful old gal, and lifted it to my lips. I even tilted my head back for show, but not a drop passed my mouth. I've done enough wilderness training to know that if someone insists you hydrate that hard, it's not because they care about your sodium levels. Instead, I reached into my bag and handed them each a granola bar. "These are the ones with the macadamia nuts you like," I told Lila. She smiled, peeled back the wrapper, and took a bite without hesitation. What neither of them knew was that those granola bars weren't quite fresh out of the oven. I'd carefully unwrapped them the night before, filled them with the very same little sedatives I found tucked in their bathroom drawer, and resealed them with more precision than a surgeon with a glue stick. 5 minutes later, Marcus slumped against a rock like his batteries had finally given out. Lila's head lolled to the side like someone unplugged her. They didn't collapse in some dramatic movie scene. They just fizzled, like balloons that didn't even get a chance to pop. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my pants, took one last look at the view, and headed back down the trail. The hike was lovely, quiet, just how I like it. At the ranger station, I dialed emergency services. "My son and daughter-in-law went hiking," I said, voice trembling just the right amount. "They haven't come back. I'm worried something happened." They were found eventually, disoriented, weak. No serious injuries, but a lot of confusion. I visited them in the hospital with a bag of apples and a crossword puzzle book. Lila looked at me wide-eyed and pale. "Did you?" she whispered. I blinked slowly, leaning forward just enough to be heard. "Why would I do something like that?" I said with a gentle smile. "I love you both." The house was quiet while they were in the hospital, and for once it was the kind of quiet I liked. Peaceful, not suffocating. I poured myself a cup of chamomile, sat on the porch with Splint's old blanket draped over my lap, and watched the birds flit around the garden like nothing had ever gone wrong. That was the moment I decided I'd had enough of temporary kindness. No more pretending. No more letting things slide. It was time to tidy up, literally and otherwise. First thing I did was open the guest room closet and start pulling their things out piece by piece. Lila's clothes, all synthetic fabrics and rhinestone buttons, packed into donation boxes without a second glance. Marcus's art clothes, which mostly looked like paint-stained pajamas, went in next. I cleared their bathroom drawers, gathered their charging cables, boxed up their gadgets, vitamins, and all the herbal face mist Lila insisted needed to be refrigerated. It didn't. Anything remotely valuable I donated to charity. Not to be petty, well, maybe a little, but because I wanted every last piece of their presents to be turned into something good for someone else. After that, I had the locks changed. Fresh keys, new bolts. Just for me. The locksmith even complimented the sturdiness of my old door. "Solid choice," he said. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad, a pen, and Marcus's credit card information, courtesy of the open laptop he'd left behind. I itemized every cent they'd spent on their little nature getaway. Fancy meals, overpriced hiking gear, a spa day Lila had slipped in without telling me, and several boutique purchases that somehow included gold-plated chopsticks. Every dollar went on Marcus's account. I printed it all out neatly, stapled it, slipped it into a manila envelope. He called me later that day, voice hot with fury. "What is this bill? Are you serious?" "Yes," I said calmly. "It's yours. I'm your son." He snapped. "Have you ever treated me like your mother?" I asked. Silence. And then the call ended. The next afternoon they came back. I heard the car door slam, then the stomping up the path, followed by pounding on my door so loud the windows trembled. I opened it just enough to block the doorway with my body. Marcus was red-faced. "We need to talk. Now." I held out another envelope. The deed. He snatched it from me, opened it, scanned the first page, and then his face dropped. "This isn't legal," he said, voice cracking. "No," I nodded. "It's not. You didn't read the fine print. It's a mock document. For display purposes only." Lila grabbed the papers from him, flipping through furiously. "You tricked us." "No," I said sweetly. "You tricked yourselves. I just let you." Then I handed them one final envelope. It was thin, just a single page inside. Marcus unfolded it, and I watched the color drain from his face completely. "Your father wasn't faithful," I said gently. "You're not biologically mine. But I raised you. I gave you everything I had. And this," I gestured to the chaos they'd created, "is what you thought I deserved." I shut the door slowly, clicked the new lock into place. A few minutes later, when the yelling gave way to faint thumps and silence, I did what I had to do. I called an old friend for support. Then I poured myself a cup of fresh tea just as he arrived. He brought a portable speaker and a record of old jazz standards. We sat in the living room, quietly sipping tea without exchanging a word. I don't know what will happen next, but I know for the first time in a long time that it will be mine.
Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you go on a hike knowing that trouble could be ahead? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.